handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2 1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4 7 tree 9er 8 9er out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds HEPT. Gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience. You know, the big topic going around headlines and on TV with the talking heads is socialism. Democratic socialism. I'm not sure I'm convinced I know what that is. People are telling us what it is, but I'm not sure I believe them. So Tom DiLorenzo is with us, and it's a real distinct pleasure to have Tom with us because he is the author of The Problem with Socialism. He's also a professor of economics. So, Mr. Tom, thanks for being on the Denise Simon Experience.
Pleased to be with you, Denise.
Tom, I gotta say, I think I took economics in the 7th grade in the public school system. That was probably the last time through 8th through 12 that they even offered it. And I would argue that's probably a big cause of where we are today. And I'm old, Tom.
Yes.
So somehow somebody in government decided that since we're on this path that we're all things government, to take economics out of the syllabus. Did I get some of that right?
Yeah, I think, economics has always, economists, at least free market economists like me, have always been sort of the skunk at the garden party with regard to government. Because, if you understand even the simplest, most basic principles of economics, you see through a lot of the follies of government intervention in general and socialism in particular. For example, a real simple lesson that I teach to my college freshmen is I tell them on the first day of class that here's what we're going to do for grades. We're going to have exams all during the semester. And then at the end of the semester, I'm going to get all the students who did really well and got, 90, 95%.
I know where you're going.
And I'm going to take points away from them. I'm going to take 20, 30, 40 points away from each of them and give them to the students who got a 50 or a 55 so that everyone will end up with a C. And at the end of the semester, I'll give everyone a C. And then I ask them, well, how much studying do you imagine you're going to do under that situation? And of course, they understand that, well, no, why would I study at all? Why would I even come to class? So I'm going to get a C no matter what happens. And that's socialism. That would be classroom socialism. And if you just understand the incentives involved in a system like this, you understand why it is that during the 20th century, it destroyed country after country after country around the world. And even today, Venezuela, which is a democratic country, democratic socialism, they adopted socialism about 15 years ago, and they've totally destroyed their country. People are starving. They're shooting cats and dogs in the streets for food. They're shooting zoo animals for food, and they don't have electricity and water in a lot of places. And millions of people are trying to leave the country. And yet, the richest person in Venezuela today, according to the Wall Street Journal, is the 35-year-old daughter of the late Hugo Chavez, the ruler, who supposedly is worth $35 billion with a B. Even though she never ran a business, or I don't even know if she ever even had a job. And so that's what socialism does for you.
Professor, let's go back to your students. Instead of saying socialism stinks because of what you were going to do with their grades, what's particularly fascinating is some of them said, okay, I'll take the C and not come to class.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
What?
you know, if the whole country had that attitude, we would live like cavemen and cavewomen. No one would produce anything, and we would all be like Venezuela. Yeah, that's for sure.
So
And
at the
you
end
know,
of the
the young
class,
people.
I would say at the end of the first day, are any of them stunned? Like, why didn't we know this before? Why weren't we taught this in high school?
Oh yes, they're pretty much taught that government equals Santa Claus, and that's why they hear people like Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton saying they want to offer free this and free that, free health care for all, free education. And I remind them that I'm not a slave, and neither are any of the other professors. So how could education ever be free? I ask them. And some of them do look stunned because, you know, they never thought of that before. How could it be free? And then another thing I do is I show them, go online and you can see something called the National Debt Clock. It's on the internet. It's a big clock that's in Times Square in New York City. And the numbers move 1,000 miles an hour because it's the national debt, which grows very quickly. Government is constantly spending our money. And I point out to them that this is on you. You know, I've been around for a while, and so I'm going to retire before too long. But you're just entering your work life, I tell these students, in a year or two. And all the taxes to pay off all this debt, it's yours. It's your debt. So it's not free. And, you know, even according to that clock, every baby born this week automatically has about $70,000 in debt, their share of the national debt there. And that's probably a gross underestimate because it doesn't count all the promises politicians have made for pensions and Medicare and all that in the future. And so, but they pretty quickly catch on, and they realize that they've been duped. And on healthcare, when free healthcare, I explain to them that basically the argument that's being made is that we cannot afford doctors and nurses in hospitals, okay, but we can afford doctors and nurses in hospitals plus a gigantic new federal government bureaucracy with hundreds of thousands of highly paid federal bureaucrats running the healthcare system. We can't afford that. That's what healthcare socialism would be. And they think about that for about 2 seconds and realize, well, that's stupid. And so it doesn't take much education, doesn't it? They catch on pretty quickly.
I would think that on day 2 of your class, they probably are. They don't even know what to expect anymore. They probably feel so cheated for the 4 years of high school. And I would imagine they'd probably go back to their dorms and go, have you guys taken an econ class? Because I got this professor that's over here telling us this. And I would think, Tom, this is probably one of the biggest, head slaps that they could possibly have.
Well, yeah, well, hopefully, that's why they're in college. We're trying to undo 12 years of socialist indoctrination. And a lot of I teach in a business school of business at Loyola University in Baltimore, and my economic students they're different. They take difficult courses like finance and accounting and economics, and they're pretty hardworking students, and they learn the simple economic lessons, and then they go back to the dorm, and their roommate might be a sociology major.
Yeah,
and they'll put a big guilt trip on them because they'll say things. The sociology major will say, well, why can't we have a $50 an hour minimum wage, And I tell my students, well, why are they so cheap? Why don't they make it a $500 an hour? Why is it cheap, $50 an hour? And so, ask them why they don't make it $500 an hour and we'll eliminate poverty for all, once and for all, forever, for everybody. And even some of the sociology majors can't get that, but some of them don't. Some of them still think there's something fishy there. That why can't we give people a $500 an hour minimum wage? And of course, nobody'd have a job at that rate. Unemployment would be 90% if we had a law like that. And so, but they get a lot of pushback from their peers who have not spent 1 minute studying economics.
Tom, do you bring up Karl Marx at all in your class?
Oh, sure, yeah. I teach a course called Capitalism and Its Critics, and I go back and forth. I have them read some of some of the stuff from the on socialism, even parts of the Communist Manifesto, and then I have them read real economic literature, and then I pick different topics, and they read both sides of some of the great debates that have taken place over the past century or so about that. So I do have them read some of Marxian economics.
All right. So if you're going to do a congressional hearing, Tom, and you have got somebody like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren in your Senate Finance Committee, for instance, what would be necessarily your opening remarks? Because everybody gets, I think, 5 minutes for an opening remark on their hearing from the panel.
Well, the biggest headline grabber would be to talk about what the news media mostly ignores, and that is Venezuela. It's the latest example of democratic socialism, and it's a disaster. And I would also be ready to explain how countries in Northern Europe, like Sweden, who went down the road of democratic socialism 50 or 60 years ago, have been spending the past 30 years running away from it as fast as they can by cutting taxes, and more than half the people in Sweden have private health insurance now. And so Bernie is sort of going around advocating the Sweden of the 1960s, and we should be more like them. And that created such a disaster in Sweden, for example, that by the 90s, the Swedish Academy of Economics, which is all the professional economists in Sweden, did a study and found that they adopted socialism in about 1950 in that country. And they concluded that they did not create a single net new job from 1950 to 1995. All those years, they had zero job growth in Sweden. And so that's what caused them to retrench. And around that time, in the beginning of the 80s, they started printing money like crazy. The Swedish central bank, their version of the Fed. We have the Federal Reserve or the Fed, and they have their version of that. And they printed so much money and created so much inflation that they had 500% interest rates. Imagine trying to borrow money to buy a house and you had to pay 500% interest rates. Anybody out there listening who knows anything about this, who has been involved in buying houses, knows that if it goes from 5% to 8%, that's a huge monthly increase in your mortgage payment. That's 500% in Sweden, and so they've retrenched ever since then. But you never hear a peep about that by the Bernie Sanders of the world. And you hardly ever hear much about Venezuela, too. I mean, you can read the Wall Street Journal and a few other places, and you hear about the horrors of Venezuela, but not much.
How long is it taking Sweden to get out from under this? I mean, is this a generational thing?
Yeah, well, Sweden is an interesting story because, in the late 19th, early 20th century, they were a very limited government, low-tax country. And as a result, there was a lot of economic freedom and a lot of free enterprise. And they had these great entrepreneurs who created Saab and Volvo automobiles, and Alfred Nobel, the inventor of dynamite, is from Sweden. And then when they adopted socialism, they basically lived off the capital that had been accumulated by previous generations until they ran out. That's why, the title of my book, The Problem with Socialism, it comes from a Margaret Thatcher quote, where she said, the problem with socialism is you eventually run out of other people's money. And that's what they always do. And that's what Venezuela is doing today. They're starting to, it's hard to get a handle on how much inflation they have there. But the latest article I read said it's 14,000% a year inflation. And so if you get a paycheck today, you better run immediately to the store and buy groceries, but the problem is there are no groceries on the shelf.
There are none. All right.
And so, what can you buy with that money anyway? And so it's a horrible thing, the people in Venezuela, because they have almost as much oil as Saudi Arabia in Venezuela, and still they've destroyed their economy with socialism.
Yeah, China's got a hold on that one now. In your class, Professor, do you bring up any part of the Constitution, meaning at least the welfare clause or the commerce clause?
Oh, sure. I talk about that. I teach another class called Law and Economics, and I cover that quite a bit. And I explain why it is that the founders wanted limited government under a constitution. And the economic lesson there is that if you look at the constitutional functions of our federal government, they're basically, most of them are things that you can make an argument that would benefit pretty much everybody: national defense, the judicial system, things like that, the post office, and patents and that sort of thing. And so these are all things that you could argue create a stable society and gives us freedom to pursue whatever we want to pursue. But then once you get into what I call the transfer society, where government goes beyond what's in the Constitution and starts playing the game of robbing Peter to pay Paul, taxing one group in order to use the money to buy votes from another group, then that has bad economic effects. The constitutional functions have mostly good economic effects on the economy because they create a stable society. But once you go down the road of saying it's legitimate for government basically to be, have one gang robbing another gang. I use an example in my classroom. I say, well, I pick out a student, say Bob, his name is, whatever the name is. I say, let's say Bob and I are walking to class and we see a BMW parked on the street and we kind of like it. And so we break into it and we're about to drive off in the BMW. And then you, Sarah, walk up and say, hey, that's my car. What are you doing? And so Bob and I say, Sarah, don't you believe in democracy? Let's take a vote on whose car it is. And Bob and I vote that it's our car. You vote that it's yours. You outvoted it's our car. That's democracy. And that, of course, is why the founding fathers wanted to strictly limit democracy, because it could be just turned into one big system of legalized plunder, a legalized theft. And so I teach that's an important economic lesson for anybody to understand.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with Tom DiLorenzo, who is the author of the book titled The Problem with Socialism. Tom, where does fascism and serfdom fit into the whole component of socialism?
Well, fascism was a form of socialism. The word Nazi stood for National Socialism. They didn't call themselves national capitalists. They called themselves National Socialists. And the most significant difference between the Nazis and the Russian communists was that the Russian communists called themselves International Socialists, whereas the German socialists called themselves National Socialists. And the Germans, the Nazis, nationalized all the major industries in Germany, and the ones they didn't take over, they were de facto nationalized through pervasive government regulation and control and regimentation. And so they basically took over the entire economy. And so, how on earth people equated the Nazis with the right wing or capitalism is a mystery to me, because they were always self-described socialists. And they singled out the Jewish people as symbols of capitalism. There's something on the web that, if you do historical research, called the 25-point program of Nazi Germany. I write about this in my book. And one of the things they say is that the Nazis want to do is to combat what they called the Jewish materialistic spirit, which was capitalism. And so they went on and on, ranting and raving against capitalism, and wanted to supplant it with socialism, their version of socialism, National Socialism. And they were opposed in this platform. They're opposed to almost every aspect of capitalism, the large-scale enterprises. They even wanted to abolish department stores and everything. And so, they're all the same gang, fascists, socialists, and people don't realize that. I quote the famous 20th century economist Friedrich Hayek, who won the Nobel Prize in 1974, and in his famous book, The Road to Serfdom. And there's an appendix in the book called Nazi Socialism. And he explained in a very scholarly way where all the people who were the inventors of fascism in the 20th century started out as socialists or communists, and then they just tweaked it a little bit, made some minor changes to their system, their version of socialism. And that's what Mussolini did, and that's what Hitler did and the Nazis.
The hub, I would say, of capitalism is necessarily Wall Street. So where is Wall Street? Why why hasn't Wall Street taken, a daily article or classes or something pushing back on what our own government is doing?
Well, there might be some individuals on Wall Street doing that, but one of the hallmarks of capitalism is capital markets. That's how financial capital, moves about the economy. If the people decide they want to spend a lot of their money on, say, iPhones, then the iPhone industry will have no trouble getting loans from the financial sector because there's money to be made there, and that's what capital markets do. They transfer money to those areas that are producing things which we actually want as consumers, and vice versa. Things we no longer want, you can't get a loan for that, or the things that we never wanted. With government, on the other hand, the government just announces, you want this, you will pay for this, and if you refuse to pay, we will put you in prison for 7 years. That's called tax evasion. And so, but in the free market, under capitalism, you only pay for the things you want. But the problem is, a lot of the people on Wall Street, so-called, have sort of they're crony capitalists. They're in bed with the government, and they make money through their connections in politics. And so even Bernie Sanders and people like him who criticize this are on the money. They're right. They should criticize this. And that's how they kind of, a lot of the young people who were Ron Paul supporters when he was running for the Republican nomination, and then he retired. Some of the same young people became Bernie Sanders supporters, even though Ron Paul is a libertarian and Bernie is a socialist who spent his honeymoon in Moscow in the middle of the Cold War, of all places. But I think the reason for that is they both made these good criticisms of the crooked system of what we call crony capitalism, which is not real capitalism. But then Ron Paul would say, well, the solution is competition, free market capitalism. But Bernie Sanders would say the solution is no competition, government monopoly. When they use these fancy phrases like Medicare for all, what they mean is a government-run monopoly of medical care. And one lesson number one that every economics student ought to learn is that monopoly is not your friend as a consumer. And so why would you think a one big government monopoly for anything, especially medical care, something as important as medical care, would be a good idea for you? It isn't.
Well, there's so many other components in all of this, Tom, and you've done a great job. I need for you to come back because we're going to be at least arguing this entire topic for, I would say, probably another 2 years.
Well, because good. Feel free to plagiarize my book as much as you want.
Well, I'm going to have you back and you can do that. But, I mean, we've got, regressive tax, we've got progressive tax, we've got regulations and all these other kinds of things. So we're necessarily under the guise, if you will, that the United States is a, free enterprise system. But only kind of sort of, because there's a lot of stipulations to all of that. And those would be these regulations and these fees and these all these tariffs and all these other kinds of things. But congratulations on the book, and we certainly appreciate your time, Tom DiLorenzo, and please come back.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. Take care.
All right. More coming your way, ladies and gentlemen, so stay with us.
About to join Don Newen, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio, and Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience, for a weekly situation report, or SITREP. 18 hours a day, Denise Simon lives her life as an intel analyst. 18 hours a day, Don Newen lives his life in the world of rock and roll. 1 hour each day, Newen receives a daily SITREP from Simon. Welcome to the Drive Time Situation Report. Fasten your seatbelt. You're now in Don Newen's car, and he is calling in for his SITREP.
Check the Talk America Radio schedules for showtimes at talkamericaradio.us.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio. For 28 years, I was in the mainstream media, most recently as an anchor at the Fox News Channel. No more. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. Radio networks like Talk America Radio will not fail you. Radio shows like Cowboy Logic Radio will not fail you. Check out the entire roster of over 60 weekly radio shows by visiting talkamericaradio.us. That's talkamericaradio.us.
TalkAmericaRadio.us.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. A couple of weeks ago, there was somebody on Fox News that so caught my attention, and mostly because I had read a remarkable summary by Josh Myers in Politico about Operation Cassandra. So I reached out to Derek Maltz, and Derek is the former agent in charge of Special Operations Division of the DEA, law enforcement, 28 years. I think he's now retired. Isn't that right, Derek?
That's right, Denise. I'm retired since 2014.
Well, you know what? Thank you for what you have done. I find I know a couple of people that are former DEA, and I find them to be probably the most frustrated people within government and law enforcement. So I can't thank you enough.
I appreciate it.
I mean, I really believe that. I have got zero tolerance for anything narcotics. I just watch the destruction, and I know that what I see is a sliver of what all of you guys in DEA have seen. So, thank you for all that you did and attempted to do and those kind of things. But I'm going to throw you a curveball to kind of start off, because I would say that Mexico, while they have been a fair-weather partner to the United States when it comes to all things drug trafficking and narcotics, we've got to go back to 3 or 4 years ago now, time does pass, when they released what I would call a murderer, and didn't bother to necessarily tell the United States, and that's Caro Quintero. Did I get that right, Derek?
That's correct. Yes, RCQ is major drug trafficker who's been around forever, and unfortunately was very involved with the murder, the kidnapping, the murder, the torture of Enrique Camarena back in 1985. And the fact that he was released, just overwhelming, just disappointment. But you know what? Just like many of these guys, they get free for a while, but he'll be caught, and he'll be in jail in the U.S. in the near future. I
so want you to be right on that one. as I said, I got a couple of friends that are former DEA, and the Kiki case is one that I think took the wind out of their sails for a very long time. Derek, you have certainly given some TV appearances in congressional testimony, and I see frustration in your face and in your voice. Are those that need to be policymakers and policy managers, are they really understanding the work of the DEA?
No, I mean, Denise, a lot of people in the Beltway tend to be very self-serving. They look out for their personal interests and their personal bank accounts. I mean, my brother died in Afghanistan in 2003 during Operation Enduring Freedom.
Mm.
He came back in a body bag, and ever since that day, my life has personally changed, and my focus has changed as well. Fortunately for me, I was able to get a job at the Special Operations Division in 2005, and I was able to work with the multiple agencies and was able to see a lot of things that happen in government, some good, some bad. And honestly, it's really disappointing to see some of the people that are in the Beltway that actually get paid a lot of money by the taxpayers, and I absolutely just don't really care about public safety. And so me personally, I basically try to do the best I can. I'm still involved with national security issues and public safety issues, and I have a lot of friends in law enforcement. I communicate with law enforcement every day, and will continue to do anything I can to push the national security priorities to the public.
Derek, we've got an awful lot of laws on the books, and I would think that, where we are today, those laws are really sufficient, but it comes down to the prosecutors and the DA in leniency. Is that part of the big frustration of DEA?
Well, the laws in this country are very antiquated, number one.
Mm-hmm.
Just as an example, when it comes to emerging technology, the laws on the books are going back into the 60s. 1968 was the law on wiretapping, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And when they came up with the law, it was based on a rotary telephone that was sitting in somebody's house in the middle of America that was never going to change, that was always in the same name, and the whole community would use the phone, right? But today, when you're dealing with advanced encryption and emerging technology, it's very difficult for law enforcement to do their job to protect America if they don't have the ability to infiltrate the communications. So that's just an example. Everything is moving so quickly with the globalization of the internet, and law enforcement moves so damn slow. So it puts the law enforcement professionals at a real disadvantage. Plus, the resources aren't available. This stuff is very expensive to get the capabilities that are needed to go after the bad guys. The budgets aren't there, and the legal processes aren't there. So it becomes a huge disadvantage to the law enforcement agencies that are actually trying very hard to do the right thing.
DEA has a global reach. Correct. It's just not about, the southwest border and, pockets of criminal narcotic activity in LA or Oakland or Atlantic City or Miami. It's truly a global thing.
Right.
And I don't.
DEA. I'm sorry. Denise, the DEA has over 60, over 90 offices in over 60 countries. And the DEA has the largest law enforcement investigative presence overseas. And the thing that everyone has to realize is that the command and control elements that want to destroy our country are all foreign. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to have an impact for public safety, you have to be able to move quickly around the world. And DEA has developed tremendous relationships with our counterparts over the last 40 years. And there's a lot of trust, and there's a lot of relationships that have been built up from counterparts that were maybe colonels that are now running the entire law enforcement agencies overseas. So the DEA agents that worked there, 20 years ago, and got elevated through the ranks into the senior executive ranks, now have these relationships that are unbelievable. So, yeah, to answer your question, the DEA is very global. And when you're looking at the worldwide drug situation, you have to look at it from a global perspective. You can't look at it as a local issue. Mm-hmm. And so you have to understand how, it's manufactured, how it's moving into America, and how the monies are moving back outside the country.
This isn't just a matter of getting the poppy and the heroin out of Afghanistan. I mean, we've got a whole China-Korea component. We've got a Lebanon component. We've got an Africa component. And Derek, I would argue that the normal people sitting at home in their living room watching the 6 o'clock news have no concept of the smuggling, the traffic lanes, the creativity, the shipments. I mean, we all think, okay, everything's great because the Coast Guard just seized 2 tons of methamphetamines, and we think, okay, that's cool. We're chomping away at this, but we're really not, are we?
Right. So that's a great point. So let me give you an example. When you talk about China is absolutely involved in a chemical warfare against America right now, and we need to wake up quickly because they're dumping fentanyl, pure fentanyl, in our country every single day of the week, and they're using the Mexican cartels to distribute the fentanyl, which is killing our citizens at an alarming rate. In 2017, there's 72,000 Americans that have died from drug overdose. Mm-hmm. Right? If you think about it, it's 200 a day. On top of that, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news. We just had a recent outbreak in Chicago, New York, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, our nation's capital, of this K2 and the spice synthetic drugs, where people are bleeding from their eyes, bleeding from their ears, and they're dropping like flies all over America. And this stuff is coming from China. So we have a chemical bombing of America from these chemicals that are coming from China. On top of that, you have the Mexican cartels making billions of dollars, dropping drugs all over America, methamphetamine, heroin, marijuana, cocaine. But here's another thing that the public is not paying attention to, and I'm glad you brought this up. So you have like multi-ton shipments of cocaine that are leaving South America every single day of the week, and these shipments are going to Africa. And people are like, well, who cares? It's Africa. No. You should care because it's Al-Qaeda, it's Hezbollah, it's other terrorist groups that are now tapping into the resources of the drug trafficking activities to support their agendas. Because the big thing, Denise, is that terrorists are increasingly turning to crime and criminal networks for their funding. And drug trafficking is generating billions of dollars around the world. So the public needs to understand that the drug issues are not just public health issues. They are national security issues as well.
Yeah, I read a book not too long ago titled Harpoon. Have you had a chance to read that one, Derek?
No, I have not seen it.
I read the book in probably a day and a half. It was a remarkable book. And then I read the Josh Myers article in Politico about Operation Cassandra. I would argue that Operation Cassandra was probably one of the larger unspoken of scandals in the Obama administration. Would that be on your short list as well?
Yes. I mean, so let me just talk about that quickly. So Project Cassandra was the DEA's effort to go after Hezbollah's cocaine and money laundering activities. What we identified was a very large trade-based money laundering scheme that was basically supporting Hezbollah. And so in 2006, when the war between Hezbollah and Israel broke out, obviously they needed cash, right? Mm-hmm. So they came up with a scenario involving used cars where the way the scheme went down, Denise, is they were sending multi-ton quantities of cocaine into West Africa. The drugs would be sold in Europe and different parts of the world. The monies would be collected, transported via Middle Eastern courier right back to Beirut, Lebanon. When the money arrived in Beirut, there would be Hezbollah militants controlling the movement of the cash into the money exchange houses. And then in the money exchange houses, they'd be routed through banks in Lebanon, and then the money would go to corresponding accounts in America. And the used car businesses all over our country would take the cash out and go actually to auto auctions and different events in America, buy used cars and send them down to West Africa to sell. When they sold in West Africa, they'd get 20%, 25% profit on all the cars. But the problem was the monies that were being generated were actually helping to support Hezbollah. And we identified hundreds of businesses around America. Unfortunately, because of our information sharing problems that we have ongoing in America, we can only include 30 of the 300 businesses in our action that we did in the Southern District of New York. And so basically, nobody really seemed to put an effort in. Like the Obama administration, I don't want to pick on the Obama administration, but like Bruce Orr, you see him all over the news these days, and him and his wife had the secret mission to take out President Trump and doing all this stuff with Christopher Steele and Glenn Simpson with the whole, Fusion GPS and the initiative paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign to take out the president. But the reality is Bruce Orr was the head of the U.S. government's threat mitigation working group, which was part of President Obama's strategy to go after transnational organized crime. Hezbollah was identified as one of the top targets in America. And unfortunately, we couldn't get our agencies to work together. So now you're reading about in the papers, right? You're reading about sleeper cells that are throughout the United States, that Hezbollah has sleeper cells in America ready to act at any time. But the problem is that we don't know if like some of these damn businesses that we identified aren't in fact the sleeper cells. And that's because we didn't take care of them when we had an opportunity. We blew it. We had 3 major drug traffickers in custody overseas. Ali Fayed was in prison in the Czech Republic. Ali Fayed was a terrorist. He's one of the main operatives for Hezbollah. And we had an extradition treaty with the Czech Republic. But unfortunately, members of the Obama administration did not engage with the Czechs, and this guy was released back to Lebanon. We had Walid Makhled in Colombia. We had General Carvajal, the head of the Venezuelan intelligence, sitting in custody in Aruba. But they were released. They weren't extradited to America because people were not paying attention. They were more concerned probably with this Iran deal, pallets of cash in the middle of the night to these global terrorists instead of providing support to law enforcement to take down these terrorists and bring them back to America to face justice. So, yeah, Project Cassandra is near and dear to my heart and actually really, really is disturbing because when you look at what's going on now, politically, it's a disaster.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with Derek Maltz, who is obviously one of our top heroes as the former agent in charge of Special Operations Division at the DEA. Derek, I can just about imagine that you and a few of your buddies are sitting in a bar having a beer, watching the news on, some of these things that are happening and some of these names that get thrown out. And I could just about imagine the conversation over a beer and a cigar that you guys are having. It would probably start off with, if only. Would that be right?
Well, let's just put it this way. So I have 3 sons, right? And what I think about is the future and the national security of America. And when you look at the evolution of Project Cassandra, in 2007, when I didn't know a thing about Hezbollah's presence in the Western Hemisphere, James Stavridis, who was the Supreme Allied Commander and the former commander of the SOCOM down there in Florida, the Southern Command, which was responsible for all that region down in South America, he provided me a fireball slide. And he said his worst nightmare is when Islamic terrorists and narco-terrorists come together, and the next thing you know is a fireball, right? That vision was in my brain from 2007. 2008, if you watched the news and you watched the media, Michael Chertoff, the U.S. government's Homeland Security Director, put out a statement that basically Hezbollah was like making Al-Qaeda look like the minor leagues.
Mm-hmm. And he was right, correct?
And basically he was right. So as a senior executive in charge of the Special Operations Division, I became very concerned because we started seeing like this cocaine, money laundering, trade-based money laundering scheme to support Hezbollah. And I was very concerned because like this was really growing every day. And you got to remember, Aman Juma was indicted for moving $200 million a month through this scheme out of the Eastern District of Virginia. And by the way, just for the public to know, he was engaged in 88,000 kilos of cocaine, the proceeds. He was moving the proceeds of 88,000 kilos of cocaine, whatever the hell it was. And that's just a very, very significant operation. Our undercover agent picked up $20 million in cash in Guatemala from this organization because they believed he can move money around the world. So it's a very, very significant, but no one seemed to really get engaged. Like the U.S. government officials like Bruce Orr and others, they really didn't seem to engage too much and try to help the DEA and the other agencies like Treasury and CBP who were working hard on this investigation. We needed to have a full court press, a unity of effort. That's the purpose of the damn threat mitigation working group. If you look at the website in the White House, both with, I'm not sure about with President Trump, but President Obama, there was a threat mitigation working group. Bruce Orr was the co-chairman, and that group had a very serious responsibility to pull in the U.S. agencies together to go after this major terrorist threat. And it just didn't happen. I mean, we did pretty good work in that we had some great support from Treasury, and we had some unprecedented actions, Patriot Act 311 action. We seized $150 million out of a bank account in Lebanon, and we shut down some businesses. But the reality was, we really didn't touch the trade-based money laundering scheme. And the Wall Street Journal did an investigative report, a couple of years ago, where they followed a car from one of the car dealerships that we included in our civil action, right back to West Africa again. So the business is booming. The car parks are booming all over West Africa. And we're sitting here in America, and we don't want to, call this what it is because it's not politically correct, right? We don't want to, get involved in that stuff. But the reality is it's a public safety disaster.
Well, that's the reason I wanted you so badly on the Denise Simon experience, and I want you to know that you've got an open invitation because there's 1,000 moving parts that I'm getting to, and because it's a public relations thing, it's a public safety thing, it's a national security thing, and we can go all the way back to Nancy Reagan when she had a problem that was that she addressed, that she took on, was just say no. And I think that helped. That planted some DNA. But it's kind of like since then, nobody cares, Derek, when it comes to, a generational problem with narcotics, do they?
No, well, that's a great point. So let me address that because I'm glad you brought that up. So Nancy Reagan had her Just Say No campaign, which was, I think, very effective. And if you look at when I was a kid growing up, everybody was smoking cigarettes, right? Your mother and father were smoking. Your grandmother, grandfather was smoking. You were in a car and they were smoking and you were in the back seat. And you look at over the years, people recognized that like cigarettes were very dangerous, with cancer and everything like that. And the education went out and, a lot of people stopped smoking over the years. But if you look at drugs, what happened is we just completely dropped the ball. And, 9/11 hit. And, we started looking at the terrorist angle, and Department of Justice made preventing terrorism the number one priority. And people just automatically, put aside the drug issues of America. And as a matter of fact, Denise, one of the big issues going on right now that the public needs to be aware of, if we have a dysfunctional system. 17 years after 9/11, we have a situation that is so broken in the sense of every leader in America talks about how terrorists are turning to criminal networks for funding. But yet our criminal investigators and our terrorism investigators are not even communicating. We have walls up 17
Again.
years after 9/11, and our government officials that are responsible for this are doing nothing about it. Like, they want to make people think that this is fine, like this is normal, like everything is working great. Just look at the Boston bombing. Catastrophic failure of information sharing.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of intel on Tamlin and his family and their involvement in marijuana trafficking, as an example, or heroin. You know, the sister, for example, was involved with heroin trafficking. And so we don't communicate because the terrorists are looking at things in the terrorism bubble, the cocoon, I call it,
Mm-hmm.
and the criminal investigators are looking at the criminal investigations, but they actually are all the same. Transnational organized crime includes terrorism. And so it's really, really bizarre to me, now that I'm retired, I look back,
Yes.
that there's still nobody in the government that is insisting that these people break down the walls. You know, it's amazing. And if the public understood the significance of that, you know, maybe they'd be writing to their Congress people. It's absolutely. I'll give you another example. So recently, the Homeland Security Committee of America had a hearing. It was called Boston to Austin. And the Austin bombing obviously was very devastating. You know, a few people died with the bombs that were going off in the neighborhoods in Austin. And obviously, the police in Austin and the chief down there did an amazing job in his leadership to pull everybody together, to use all the experts that we had in Austin, Texas, to figure out who this guy was, this maniac. And they went out and they arrested him and they prevented additional deaths, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was great. It was a
Mm-hmm.
success story. But so the Congress then tries to have a hearing to show 5 years after Boston how well we're working together.
Yeah.
But they failed to tell the public that it was like dealing with apples and oranges, because in the Boston bombing, it was information that came in from the Russians in early 2011. And 2 years went by and there was no coordination,
Mm-hmm.
no synchronization of effort, no information sharing. And then the bombs went off and people died. And then, of course, after people die, law enforcement does very well to work together. Just like in Austin, they did very well after the fact. We need proactive information sharing when information comes in. So in the Boston case in 2011, if they would have shared the information with all their interagency partners, we would have been able to determine that there was drug intelligence, so we could have investigated this guy, Tamlin, for his drug activities. Just like Al Capone. He was a mass murderer, but he went down for a tax charge.
Yes. Well, Derek,
It's the same concept.
I got to thank you, and please know that I'm going to tap you on the shoulder and have you back, because, you know, it's kind of like with you, we get the rest of the story. And
Yeah, exactly.
the fact that in 1 year that we have 72,000 people that died. I mean, that's a scandal into itself that I don't know that we can even begin to process or comprehend.
Think about it, Denise. In 9/11, which was a very, very disturbing, devastating day for America,
Mm-hmm.
3,000 people died, right, on one day.
Right. And look what we
But
did.
think about it. Think about it now. 72,000 have died in 2017.
Thank you, Derek, and come back again soon and travel safely. And ladies and
Thank you
gentlemen,
very
thanks. There's more coming your way, so stay with us.
You can't handle the truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman, Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder, Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEPT, cast
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Reached across the pond on this next segment. Got our old friend David Clews with us, who is the founder of UK Unity. And while we have our own scandals going on in the United States, Britain certainly has them. And we need to be watching them carefully, because what's going on over there affects what's happening over here. And so welcome back, David. Very happy you could be with us.
Denise, an absolute pleasure. Delighted to be on, and thanks very much for asking me.
Let's kind of start off. One thing that was a flash in the headlines here in the United States for probably 40 seconds was that, that your London mayor, because of this recent attack that you had, wants to get rid of cars in and around
that's right.
in and around Parliament. We just make it kind of a big walking park over there. Is that how he fixes the problem?
Well, it's interesting because I think I said this to you. On this one, I actually have a slight agreement with him, but not for the right reasons as him.
All right.
I think that have you been over to the Parliament? Have you been over to Westminster?
No.
Where it is, it's actually, see, for demonstrations and protests, it's actually a really, really big thoroughfare. And there actually has been a movement for a couple of years amongst people on the right and populists who want to have a wider space, because it's actually tough to hold demonstrations outside Parliament, because there's Parliament Square, which is the grassy bit, but that's controlled by the Greater London Authority, and they you have to ask them for permission, and you're not allowed to use any megaphones outside Parliament without permission either. I know you guys laugh at all these things, don't you?
Well, but see, our Capitol building's very much the same way. I mean, the parking in there are really no cars that are very close at all. So there's all this grassy areas, and there are constant protests. I mean, in Washington, D.C., they even have roving protest cells that just walk up and down city blocks in Washington, D.C. all the time for whatever reason. So
I think when your point was about Cannes is, how do you stop terrorism? Well, we'll just ban cars. It's ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. And it's crazy. It really is crazy. I mean, have you seen the footage of the guy that attempted to do it?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's fortunate that nobody was killed. It was just cyclists, but it's crazy. And you see all the bridges around Westminster as well. They always go on in Britain about how Donald Trump or wants to build a wall and all the things that's going on in America. Well, we're having to build walls to stop people from driving cars and trucks into us.
And so what is, I guess, happening in Britain is you have so many of the very same conditions that we have here, but it's just as convoluted. Yeah. Yes.
I mean, the guy that's been arrested for it is from Sudan originally. Now, Sudan is a war-torn country with massive amounts of extremists. But there's hundreds of thousands of Sudanese living in the United Kingdom.
And you guys are very happy to just give them citizenship, eh?
Well, unfortunately, the government is, yes, and the whole sort of European refugee crisis, and you've got millions of people who are undocumented. I know in the US you talk about undocumented migrants, but the difference between the UK and America, and I know you guys have got cities and it's built, but there's not much space in the United Kingdom, and all these people are living in the southeast of England, and it's exploding.
Well, I made a comment yesterday, David, to myself, and it kind of goes like this. We obviously found out that we had an illegal here that killed this poor girl in Iowa, Molly Tibbetts.
That's terrible, yeah.
Okay. And so now the discussion kind of goes right back to immigration. I would argue that we keep saying that we got to have immigration reform. Well, reform isn't going to stop the flow. I mean, it just isn't. Even a wall necessarily won't stop the flow. And that is because last year we had 700,000 people overstay their visas. And so the matter of immigration here in the United States, the topic, the discussion, the debate, well, I would say is not going to go away until their home countries are somewhat stabilized and people don't have a reason to leave. I would say the same as it is applies to the UK. Did I get that right?
Yep, I think that's a very good point you're making. A lot of the refugee problems that we have in Europe is because of what's going on in Syria. Apparently Syria has resulted in about 2 million people coming to Europe. And I mean, I know these numbers aren't as big maybe in the case of America, which is it's 250 million, isn't it, America?
No, we're 330 million.
330, right? Sorry, it's huge. Whereas in Europe and the UK is only 65 million. Mm-hmm. So when you're thinking, you've got last year they say that the UK had a net migration of 400,000 people, but that means a million came in and 600,000 left. See the 600,000 that left, they were probably British people. And the million that came in were from Africa and the Middle East. How,
David, is this affecting really the whole Brexit thing? I'm just really worried that this Brexit deal isn't, it isn't panning out. I mean, the influence really is external influence that Theresa May is not dealing with or is dealing with. I mean, it's so convoluted. We at least don't have that problem.
No, you certainly don't. Theresa May is being regarded as a Trojan horse. She came in and said that she would deliver a full Brexit. Brexit means Brexit, and she's actually done the very opposite. The Brexit that she's offering is what's being called a brino, which is Brexit in name only.
That sounds familiar.
So
well,
it's farcical.
What is your parliament? What is the parliament's influence on Brexit?
Well, this is the whole problem. Originally, the referendum was supposed to. The government was going to just pass the legislation to allow Brexit to happen, and then this woman called Gina Miller, who is a very unpopular woman, launched a legal challenge that it had to go through Parliament. So this is the big problem. The whole Brexit process is now going through Parliament.
And is that...
Parliament, most MPs, you've got about 650 MPs. The majority of these members of Parliament are pro-Remain. They want to stay in the European Union. So they are doing what they can to undermine Brexit.
And so you have about a year left before this thing has to, the
end of March, yeah, just under a year.
Okay, and so what happens on the other side? Does it work? Does it not work?
Well, the one big thing they're talking about is a no-deal Brexit, and that's where we leave the European Union without a deal. And in my opinion, that's what we should do. And in many pro-Brexit supporters, that's the same. But they're trying to scare people by saying that if we do leave, there'll be food shortages, there'll be medicine shortages. It's garbage. So the government and the establishment led by Theresa May are trying to convince people that they have to back her plan.
Well, I mean, we're talking about a deal. I mean, what is really the deal, David? I mean, you leave the European Union and you stand on your own, and then you do bilateral agreements with whatever countries you want to do agreements with. And
sounds good to me. It's the fact that we've got the people who are running these negotiations don't want us to leave the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, they are coming up with ways to sort of kind of keep us involved with the European Union.
Oh. And so, and the fascinating thing is the European Union is a collective. In other words, your government is, the British government isn't the British government. There really isn't one. There is a quasi committee, which I would call at this point Parliament. But the government is really run out of the Belgium headquarters, correct?
Well, correct, yes. That's the European laws have more authority than laws passed in Britain. And that's one of the reasons why most people voted to leave the European Union, so that we set our own laws, not Europe.
All right. And so with that, if you get to have your own laws, or you're supposed to, and I would argue that, it's certainly you should, where are the other countries? Have you heard other countries within the European Union that they want to necessarily leave the Union too, but they're doing kind of a wait and see for another...
The big thing to remember is Britain is a net contributor to the European Union. So we pay in about £8 billion a year. So that's about, $12 billion. It's not a huge amount of money, but it is over here. Most countries are what's called net beneficiaries. So your countries like Poland, Hungary, Italy, all your Eastern European countries, they all benefit financially from being in the EU. So whilst countries like Poland and Hungary are becoming increasingly more anti-European Union, they wouldn't do anything about it because of the money they get.
Fascinating.
So the way it works is, like, everybody in Poland, my wife's actually from Poland, so people in there's this thing called the Common Agricultural Policy. So if you own a farm, you get a payment from the European Union.
Oh yeah, we have that here. Yeah.
Everybody and their granny in Poland owns a farm, so they all get a European payment. So if they were to leave the EU, all they would see is, well, I'm going to lose my farm payment, so why would we want to leave?
Yeah, we have that here too, farm subsidies. All right, so UK Unity does these rallies.
Yep.
Britain First does these rallies.
Yep.
The whole Tommy Robinson thing does these rallies.
Yep.
With all of these activities going on, is the UK in total, not just Britain, but the collective, is this movement growing enough that people, the voters, the citizens are finally beginning to understand under what they were living with, such that the movement's growth is a threat enough to kind of speed up this process, and you have your sovereignty where it needs to be?
I would lie to you if I said yes, we're changing the agenda, but what I will say is that things are changing in the UK. People's eyes are being opened, but it's very, very slow to make that change in politics. So with what happened to Tommy Robinson, with our rallies, with getting out there, people are seeing that the political system is failing us, but whether it translates into political change is another factor altogether. And I know it's a problem that exists in the USA as well.
Yeah.
You've got your sort of House Republicans, your mainstream Republicans, and then you've got your sort of Tea Party activist Republicans. So there has never been a bigger disconnect between the people and the politicians in the UK. Not in my lifetime.
Or here either.
No.
In a big way. Are your members of parliament, are any of them necessarily nervous, or do they just feel secure enough in their positions that they're just kind of dismissive of Britain First or UK Unity?
Well, Britain First are their own thing, and they're
correct.
They're not maybe as powerful as they once were, and they had a big social media reach. The thing about British people is that they're very reserved.
Yeah.
We aren't. I've said that before. We we're not like Americans. We won't just tell you how we feel. We'll get angry about it, but we wouldn't tell anyone.
Let's go have tea and crumpets.
Correct. There is an element of that, but I do sense that people are waking up. And in my opinion, we are sowing the seeds for change that will take place in 10 to 15 years.
It'll be that long, huh, David?
Yes, 100%. You've got to remember, Britain is the same as America between Democrat and Republican. It's this two-party system. And there hasn't... The two prime ministers that really changed things, the first one was Thatcher, who got elected in 79, and then Blair in 97. They're the two main sort of political leaders since 1945.
Mm-hmm.
But Thatcher did a lot of good, she did a lot of bad. Blair, on the whole, just did a lot of bad. And it was Blair that opened up the gates to mass immigration, and Tony Blair is hated in the United Kingdom. Hated.
And so what is he doing now? Is he kind of working against Brexit?
Against Brexit. Yeah, he's totally against Brexit. And he's very much seen as a divisive figure. He's got this thing called the Tony Blair Foundation, and he does a lot of work with Gulf states like the Saudis, and
always has.
Yeah, and see, that's the other big sort of issue in the UK. Saudi Arabia has a very big influence in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Saudi money. Saudi Arabia buys a lot of weapons as well. And same in America to an extent during the Bush years.
Oh, yeah.
And Blair is not liked, but he's actively any major political figure is against Brexit.
Well, you bring up a very good point, and I think it's something that we certainly need to really understand, is that you've got really a decade before it, and that is if Britain can keep the traction and keep the education going on, then you have a decade before things can necessarily go where they need to be. Now, 100%. That's a very long time. I think in perspective, that might be the same thing here in the United States. It could be every bit of 10 years. Over here, however, things can be unwound pretty quickly and kind of go backwards. Is there a chance that may be the case in Britain?
Yeah, there is always the chance, but the hard thing is what we as an organisation say is that the first thing that matters is Brexit. Unless we get a full Brexit and leave the EU, we can't move on to stage 2, which is to secure our borders, which is to try and bring in a sense of patriotism in being British, and the values, the sort of Judeo-Christian values that made Britain great. We need to somehow get back to that, but if we can't leave the EU, all bets are off, really.
What is the deal? What is the reputation with Nigel Farage in Britain these days?
Nigel Farage is a hero amongst Brexit supporters. I know you guys, you love him over there, and he's on Fox News a lot. I like Nigel Farage. I think he connects with like blue collar workers that other politicians can't. But there is a lot of people who despise Nigel Farage as well.
For what reason?
Because of what he stands for.
Okay.
Because of his policies. And so I would say 30% of the population love Nigel Farage. 30% don't care, and probably about 40% hate him.
How much influence does he really have in politics in Britain?
During the referendum, he played a pivotal role. Now he is he's a very good speaker. He's very commanding. In terms of actual day-to-day change, not a huge amount.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm being brutally honest about it, and I'm sure he would tell you the same as well. But from a cultural perspective, Nigel Farage exerts huge influence.
I'm of the notion that Nigel Farage needs to be multiplying more Nigel Farages.
We need to clone him.
Well, that's it. I mean, I know that sounds nuts, but I mean, one man can't do it himself. And so I believe that, he needs to be on a force multiplying agenda.
The thing as well is, you look at what's happened to Nigel Farage. He had, during the referendum, he had to have bodyguards.
Yeah.
He went out for lunch once in a pub, and activists stormed the pub to try and put him out. And that's the other thing is as well. You look at guys like Tommy Robinson and the Britain First people; they've all been sent to jail for minor offences.
Yes,
so that's the big problem in politics: is good, charismatic people don't maybe want to get as involved as they should.
Well, yeah, I think this whole formality thing that you Brits have might have to be dismissed for a little while.
It is, and that I detect big changes amongst people and their point of view. Their respect for politicians is at rock bottom. Their respect for the courts, their respect even for the police are now at rock bottom, because we've had years of liberal pro-EU propaganda and ways of running it, and we've realised that it doesn't work. Indeed, it doesn't work. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with David Clews, who is at ukunity.org.uk, and want very badly for all of you to subscribe to the work that they're doing over there. You really only have the BBC that does any kind of international reporting. We get the BBC over here in the United States, and I guarantee you could probably only count about 100 people that even watch the BBC over here, probably with good reason because of the limited reporting that goes on. I don't know if I mentioned this the last time, but it's really interesting. Canada, Australia, America, Britain, it's all the same issues. And I'm seeing more and more people are taking a keener interest in everyone else's country, which is good because, a lot of people in America came from Britain originally. Yeah. So that we are all intertwined as nations, and we're all allies as well. Very good point. And David Clews, thanks for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience. I'm going to keep tapping you on the shoulder to come back. And ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. There's more coming your way.
About to join Don Newen, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio, and Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience, for a weekly situation report, or SITREP. 18 hours a day, Denise Simon lives her life as an intel analyst. 18 hours a day, Don Newen lives his life in the world of rock and roll. 1 hour each day, Newen receives a daily SITREP from Simon. Welcome to the Drive Time Situation Report. Fasten your seatbelt. You're now in Don Newen's car, and he is calling in for his SITREP.
Check the Talk America Radio schedules for showtimes at talkamericaradio.us.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio. For 28 years, I was in the mainstream media, most recently as an anchor at the Fox News Channel. No more. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. Radio networks like Talk America Radio will not fail you. Radio shows like Cowboy Logic Radio will not fail you. Check out the entire roster of over 60 weekly radio shows by visiting talkamericaradio.us. That's talkamericaradio.us.
TalkAmericaRadio.us.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. As we come into our final segment, we've got the distinct pleasure of having Alex Holstein with us, our favorite foreign policy guy. But this one's actually going to be on a little bit of a domestic thing. He's with Geopolitical Monitor, one of my favorite go-to sources. And so welcome, Alex. And you know, we're going to talk about Iran and these sleeper cells, but what's fascinating is it never even really made the headlines here in the United States. This topic came out, I don't know, about a week and a half ago by some real experts, I might add, and got about 4 seconds of eye time, not even hearing time.
Well, that's because we give more attention to our Armenian relations because the Kardashians are involved in that. So we Iran doesn't register with the Kardashians, so we don't really talk about it very much over here. But yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean, we don't give very much attention. Although, this is why the internet and online media is so important, because you do get some very good journalists out there and people like yourself who are posting articles and commenting and analyzing and or just straight reporting on the topic. So I mean, that's why the internet is such an important source. That's why we at geopoliticalmonitor.com are online focus on online publication, because it's a great resource for this type of thing. But yes, to get to the matter at hand, Iranian covert operations are at high speed. They're under our radar screen. They're certainly under our media's radar screen. Fortunately, the FBI is clearly engaged. We've had a few cases in the last couple of years with people being busted, not just the case that you wrote about, but also the case that Congressman Peter King just referred to of 2 Hezbollah operatives being busted. We've seen an alleged plot against the Saudi ambassador. There's some murkiness there, and there's some questioning as to whether this was actually ordered by Iran or whether it was carried out by rogue operatives. It was a bit sloppy. I'm a little bit dubious when it's so sloppy, because Quds Force, which is the main Iranian sort of their version of the CIA Special Activities Division or Special Operations Group, or a sort of quasi-commando / espionage experts, are able to do both types of sort of paramilitary warfare, but also engage in undercover espionage type operations. These guys are really sharp. Their leader, Qasem Soleimani, General Soleimani, who's their commanding officer. I always say this is a guy who in the Middle East at least could head fake his own shadow. So he's and he pretty much owns every back alley in the Middle East, certainly in Iraq these days, and parts of Syria as well. He's been a very visible presence on both fronts, and he's a very formidable adversary, and that trickles down. And we see it also replicated in Hezbollah, who's their main terrorist proxy force. These are guys who have very, very good tradecraft skill sets in their tactical operations. And when they want you to know they've done something, it's usually purposeful. For example, I'll give you an example. One of their top operatives for many years, a man who before 9/11 was responsible for more American deaths than any terrorist in history, Imad Mughniyeh, who was chief of operations for Hezbollah, Iranian trained, one of the founding members of Islamic Jihad, which was a Hezbollah front for terror. Mughniyeh apparently left his fingerprints in the bathroom of TWA Flight 847, which was hijacked in 1985, not hijacked by Mughniyeh, but hijacked by Hezbollah operatives trained by Mughniyeh. They brought it to Beirut, landed it in Beirut, and Mughniyeh came on in the middle of the night, snuck on the plane to, I guess, interrogate or take off hostages. And in the midst of that, purposely left his fingerprints in the bathroom so that he would be identified as having been slipped on and off the plane. He wanted the Americans to know he had done that. So, those are the types of sneaky little things that they do. And unlike, Osama bin Laden or many of the Al-Qaeda leaders you've heard about, al-Zawahiri, Mughniyeh was as much an operator as he was a commander. He had excellent skill sets and training. So that's the kind of foe we face. Qasem Soleimani, same type of deal. He's a very formidable adversary, and they've been developing really strong networks, particularly in terms of forward operations against the United States, or in preparation for any sort of operation against the United States within the United States. One of the staging grounds for them has been in Latin America. And we talked about the nexus last week on your show between, crime and terror. Well, Hezbollah is one of the, groups that is at the forefront of mixing the two and are engaged in Latin America in many types of criminal activity, which fund their operations and allow them to operate there in places like Ciudad del Este, which is the tri-border region, which is virtually lawless. They apparently have a training camp out in the jungle in that area. They also engage in extortion among the expat community, Iranian or Lebanese expat community in Ciudad del Este, and they engage in recruitment, and they've operated down there. Look, in 1992, you had the bombing of the Israeli embassy. That was a Hezbollah operation. In 1994, you had the AMIA bombing. That was a Hezbollah operation in Argentina. So they are well established down there for many decades, and it is obviously a geopolitically sensitive region in relation to the United States. And you add to that an open border. You add to that also that they have been operating within U.S. borders, using NAFTA, for example, exploiting legitimate business covers in order to legally enter the United States under those covers and engage in operations that not only fund their activities, but also allow them to, conduct reconnaissance, recruit sleeper cells or infiltrate sleeper cells at the same time. And that's a pretty scary thing.
Alex, what is actually remarkable is that there are several outside government I don't want to necessarily call them think tanks, but they're really policy terrorist head shops, if you will, that are doing some remarkable work that it's almost like inside government they don't have time to do. And with that, from time to time, these, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, for instance, they submit white papers on what they have found. They're doing the traveling. They're going to these places to see what things are really about. And then from time to time, they give congressional testimony. So it then becomes on record. And, it goes over to, the appropriate congressional committees, Homeland Security, or even over to FBI or wherever it may be. And so it's not like the United States, the officials that need to know, don't know, because they do know. They're getting this information. And it's proven information because, you're getting, the guys, they are getting their boots muddied. going to these locations and scoping them out, and even oftentimes collaborating with, marshals or DEA or ATF or Department of Homeland Security or FBI or any of these other deals. So the warning has been that there are Iranian sleeper cells here in the United States, coupled with the fact that it was reported for a second that 2 Iranian spies, one had a dual citizenship, were arrested. They were, and the materials that they were arrested with were proving that they were plotting some kind of nastiness because of the pictures and because of the conversations that they were having and so forth and so on. So then you have the component of we've got other reports of Iranians, and this is coming from other cyber experts, that the Iranians are actually practicing some really nasty cyber tactics. So
yeah.
Here you've got a trifecta of a mess, and nobody's reporting except for you and me, Alex.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the occasional internet reporter plus us. I mean, we look. I mean, it's because it's not. Well, like I said, it's not Kardashian, it's not Cohen, it's not Russia collusion, which is really now morphed into campaign finance law violations that aren't really campaign finance law violations, in my opinion. But in any case, so that's what's eating up the headlines. Unfortunately, should it be headline news? Not necessarily. I mean, this has been going on for decades and decades. But like you said, there's a lot of groups out there that are doing it and reporting it to the right people. I mean, I really don't care if Wolf Blitzer at CNN talks about it every day.
Right.
And I don't mean that as an insult to Wolf Blitzer or anything. It's just that I mean it I'm glad to hear. I prefer to hear that the FBI is putting an ear to the ground. The fact that we have people being busted, the fact that we have cases open, the fact that I do know from sources inside the government, for example, that for example, that Hezbollah has been active in Mexico, that they're aware of that they're aware of a mosque down in Chiapas, where there has been a Shiite mosque where there has been some Hezbollah activity, suspected Hezbollah activity. That's a scary thing, but at the same time, or that Iranians took an interest in a chemical facility, chemical factory in Mexico, just over the border, I think from Texas. Those are interesting and a little bit frightening and disconcerting things, but it's also heartening to hear, okay, well, at least the FBI or whoever, whatever group is on it, and they're aware of it, particularly in a situation or a time where we often find ourselves dropping the ball on threats. I mean, especially when you've had coaches, like John Brennan. I call them coaches because that's who really, the senior leadership at these CIA or wherever it's supposed to be. They're like head coaches in football, right? Well, when you have it, John Brennan, all these people, I'm just going to veer a second off here because it's related in terms of our leadership and what they're paying attention to. You have guys like John Brennan and James Clapper and Michael Hayden out there saying we should keep our clearances because we're experts and we should advise the government. Well, I'm sorry, but if I make the analogy of the NFL, if I own an NFL team and I bring in a consultant to help me fix my team, I'm going to hire Bill Belichick out of retirement. I'm not going to hire the guy who chose to give the ball up when he won the coin toss in overtime for the Detroit Lions, who has a 5-27 record. Brennan is more like that Detroit Lions guy, not was actually a real coach. I can't remember his name, but there was a guy who did that. The record is 5-27 in the NFL. That was his total NFL record. Who wants to be that guy or Don Shula Jr. I want the guy who, went to won 5 Super Bowls and went to 8, and needs a whole nother building for his trophies. That's the guy I want. And we have a bunch of these guys like Brennan and Clapper and Hayden who are losers. That's who's been running this for 30 years. They're losers. There's no other way to say it. They're losers. Let's not pussyfoot around here. They are losers who lose. And that's why we have all these cells in our country. That's why Russia has been able to run so many ops against us. The Iranians have run so many ops against us. The victories that we have are due to the people that you and I know, Denise, who are the people we don't hear about, who are the actual foot soldiers and frontline people in the war on terror, in the battles against Hezbollah, in the trenches and the back alleys of Moscow against the Russians. These are the heroes. These are the people who are good, who are sharp, and despite everything thrown against them by a bureaucracy which is necrotic at best, these guys have succeeded in having those victories that we hear about.
Alex, let me ask you this interesting question, because the CIA, it's interesting how they break down their assignments. I mean, they've got people that run specific desk. You go over here and you're going to run the Russia desk, and you're going to run the Eurasia desk, and you're going to run the Europe desk, and you're going to go run the, Latin America desk. Okay. And so then there's like these teams at CIA that do that. And then of course they collaborate with the operatives that are, in the field. Now the FBI, it doesn't operate that way. We've got all these field offices, and these field offices, I think on a large project or a large operation, they may collaborate together, but for the most part, everything is clustered. So Minneapolis may not necessarily be talking to Dallas, or Norfolk is not talking to Phoenix. So when you package something like Iranian cells that are operating here in the United States, I would say there's not some kind of an assigned team. If there's an assigned team, it actually comes out of the Justice Department. And the Justice Department's running it, and not the FBI level / DHS level. So there's, you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's too much. I think we have too many intelligence organizations and counterintelligence. When they say 17 U.S. intelligence agencies say that, Russia hacked the election, which includes the Coast Guard, by the way, because they would weigh in on that. And the DEA. No, but there are too many. There are way too many. Every time something comes up, it's like, there's a specific kind of, pollen in the air that's a threat. Oh, we're going to have the anti-pollen task force agency now. That's going to be the new task force to take care of pollen. The allergy ATF. But we need to tamp it down a little bit. I think we need to streamline. I mean, the biggest shock to me after 9/11 was that we didn't streamline our intelligence services and government. We enlarged them. We created an entire new department, the Department of Homeland Security, which I get what they were trying to do. They're trying to harness this and put a bridle on this huge bureaucracy, but they just made it bigger. So
I think it was good for a while, and then it got stupid again.
Well, yeah, because they didn't do what they should have done, which is say, okay, certain agencies have to go. These weren't, look, the CIA, everybody acts like the FBI and CIA were created by George Washington, and that it's part of our constitutional fabric that we have to keep these agencies, otherwise we're going to, it is going to upset the gods on Mount Olympus. I mean, no, we have to be realistic. If the FBI is a bureau of investigation for many things, but if they're not doing the job on counter, and by the way, I love the FBI agents I know, and I know a lot of them. They're wonderful, brave people who are committed to service for their country. But if as a bureaucracy, it's not able to handle all the jobs that are necessary for domestic security, we need to split it off. We need to say, okay, FBI, maybe you're great at doing the mafia and organized crime and bank robberies and kidnappings and all that juicy stuff, and serial killers. Let's not forget serial killers, because we had Hannibal Lecter. So let's do all that. You guys do all that. And then let's have a domestic, after 9/11, I would have gone with a domestic security service like MI5 that has no arrest powers, but yet can advise the FBI when it's time to arrest somebody, or, to make a case or whatever. I get why there's pushback against that, particularly from civil libertarians. But, look, the NYPD, which does have arrest powers, in terms of domestic security, a domestic security organization, the NYPD intelligence branch, which Ray Kelly turned into a really, really muscular intelligence gathering organization after 9/11. That is the perfect example of what a domestic security service should operate like, with or without arrest powers.
Well, we had this Josh Myers, investigative journalist, that did some great work, because he put out probably a 10 or 12,000 word article a couple of months ago now in Politico about Project Cassandra. Mm-hmm. And I read the thing and I was really quite in shock, just really in shock. Another segment of this show is with one of the top guys at DEA that worked on Project Cassandra, of which Obama eventually shut down. Mm-hmm. But this was managed by DEA, and DEA has got probably 50 foreign offices. And what ended up being remarkable was that a White House could shut down something like that. I mean, it was a massive operation. And yet they sometimes butted heads with FBI, and they sometimes butted heads with CIA. And here they were trying to do this whole other thing because of the operations that Hezbollah was running. And so I have this fear, and it may be misplaced, that we're talking about these Iranian cells that are operating in the United States that nobody's really talking about. And I'm with you. That's really kind of okay. But I just want to know that get a wink and nod from somebody that, other than you and me, that people are on top of those things. Okay, so having said that, I would say we can't afford to shut these things down, correct?
Well, you're absolutely right. And that, let me just say your point about, now here within this context, your point about national media exposure is very, very good, because within this context, especially because this is exactly, even in retrospective format, even if it's after the administration is gone. And it's not because I want to beat up on the Obama administration. I wouldn't care if it's the Bush administration or the Reagan administration. This is exactly the kind of thing that CNN, Fox News, whoever, MSNBC, should be talking about when a Politico reporter writes an article about Project Cassandra, or a series of articles, or does an expose. Then that should get further fuel. And this is where the internet with, traditional television and broadcasters and cable can work so well. That should fuel a more national media exposure discussion and focused discussion about such an event, questioning why the administration would shut down something like Project Cassandra, what the context of their decision making was, why they made it. We know why, because of the Iran deal, right?
Correct.
And for your listeners aren't aware, Project Cassandra was the DEA investigation into Hezbollah funding. Hezbollah using drug trafficking to fund their activities, which we've talked about in regard to Africa and ISIS and the Al-Qaeda affiliates there, but it's worldwide. And of course, Hezbollah's involved in it. We talked about how Hezbollah sells Captagon to ISIS so that ISIS can use it on the battlefield against Hezbollah. So, I mean, they're that bad in the drug trafficking, but, this is obviously, why we know why the Obama administration shut it down, because of the Iran deal, and Iran is the biggest sponsor of Hezbollah. This is just another thing. So this is something that all reporters, whether left wing, right wing, in their personal lives, need to be reporting upon, no matter what the administration is, and no matter what the chronology is. If it's 2 years after the administration left, look, this is something we found out about the Obama administration. It needs to be told. Politico isn't exactly a Trump trumpet. They're not big pro-Trumpers. So for them to put this out there, that's good reporting, and that's what reporters should be doing. And this bears discussion. You're absolutely right. In that particular context, the ongoing discussion about Iranian operations, I get why it's left on a daily basis to people like you and me and blogs and more sort of niche journalists.
Well, we all subscribe to, certain sources. We might be subscribing to the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, or to FBI, or, some of these others like Foundation for the Defense of Democracies that are doing some good work. And it's kind of interesting on what they're not reporting from time to time that that is out there, which tells you that it's much more serious. It's an ongoing operation, and we're not quite ready for prime time on it.
That's right.
And so it's fascinating when you read something like Border Patrol and Homeland Security intercepted an alien smuggling thing and blah, 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 blah. We got 34 people out of it. And then that's kind of it. But wait. It's like, who are those 34 people? Were they Hezbollah operatives? Were they Iranians? Let's get the rest of the story here so we have some kind of context. And I think that it's always what's missing. So it's kind of like, can you pick up the phone and call Laredo border sector and say, hey, who were these guys? Do you think they're going to tell you? No.
No. Well, and frankly, I mean, Hezbollah doesn't even need to come across the border legally because they have NAFTA to help them do it legally with their front businesses. So Hezbollah does everything. I mean, Hezbollah is not just they were running cigarettes out of North Carolina, illegal cigarettes. I mean, people forget that they're still illegal. Yeah. Used cars, the illegal cigarette trade was a big thing, for them. People forget about illegal cigarettes. That's a big deal, especially here in Canada, like between Canada and the United States, there's a lot of illegal, cigarette trade going on because of Canada being so tight-fisted with the tobacco market up here. So, American cigarettes, getting them illegally is a big deal. You'd be shocked about that, but it's true. So there's a lot of that. What I am happy about to hear, though, is that the DEA has veered away from, or tried at least to veer away from, just going after medical marijuana cancer patients in California or wherever, and we're actually going after Hezbollah. And, kudos to the DEA and all those agents who worked on that. And I feel bad for them that it was, the rug was pulled out from under them, or the prayer rug was pulled out from under them.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, give a big round of applause to Alex Holstein, one of my favorite go-to fellers out there in the world. Make sure that you go certainly visit their website, which is geopoliticalmonitor.com. Did I get it right?
Yep, you got it.
.com. Thank you, Alex, for being with us, and come back again soon. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun sharing some space with you, and we'll see you again next week.